come back to Miguel here because it's interesting. The notion of distributed workspace, of sort of networked workspace, is not a new notion. Anyone in this room who who's been who 10 years ago worked out of a Regis for a while will feel shudders of recognition as they think back to that horrible time. And that's not what this is about. Co-working is very different. And I was hoping, Miguel, you could talk a bit about how WeWork represents this, because WeWork is ultimately fundamentally a community, or that is how it's designed. It is a networked community. My favorite facts about WeWork is, and I think is interesting, is one, there is you have your own internal social network, or you did. Two, they have their own annual summer camp, so you have this sort of culture building things for people who have nothing technically to do with each other than the fact that they're members of the same workspace. And three, that you've started offering discounted health insurance to members as well, because you've achieved that sort of scale of a corporation without anyone being corporate. So how do you blend the city, the members, the community together and sort of scale it up?
Well, we also had a Halloween party last night with about 1,200 people, 1,200 members at Edison Ballroom, which was a sort of perfect example of the kind of thing you can do with scale. And I mean, not to sort of go out of the box in terms of this discussion, but I actually think last night there was an incredible thing that happened because of the expression that people had in their costumes. And of course, New Yorkers do great Halloween costumes. That's sort of part of our culture. But I mean, there was some absolutely extraordinary things, and the community kind of, people were trying to best each other in that, and they're all, competitive startups, and there was themed costumes. There was one group that came as the guy from Despicable Me, and then all his minions that sort of, there was some really cool stuff like that where you saw a whole company, and that became sort of competitive. So I think one of the things that we've learned, because of our scale, we're able to sort of provide the good parts about a larger company, where you do have certain divisions and there are company culture things that emerge. You get some of those things when you're larger, and I think that you can also get an interplay of if you have a headquarters as a large company in New York or San Francisco or DC or Berlin, each one of those headquarters also develops its own sort of personality, and sort of has an identity. And I think that the same thing happens. So, Midtown, our building in Midtown is much different than our buildings in Soho. Just the vibe is different. So I think that there's a lot of things that are emerging. I don't think we know all the answers yet, but I would definitely say that being able to do large scale partnerships can make a huge difference. Our healthcare plan took us literally 18 months to formulate. We had one guy working on it almost full time for that long to make something would work. Now it's probably all going to be almost irrelevant because of the whole changes to the healthcare program. But these are the kind of things that you can only do if you're big. No small space can make that happen. But just to speak to one other thing, I think that we also see, I literally was talking to a guy yesterday who funds his startup by renting his apartment on Airbnb on the weekends, staying with friends and on the weekend, and he makes enough money from that to literally run a startup with one employee and some interns. And I was he was kind of telling me how WeWork feels like his home, and he's there all the time, And I was I felt like he was about ready to tell me that he sleeps in his office, but he was a little worried that I was gonna say that's against the policy. So I mean, you get that. It's actually your startup home is really a home. You sleep on the couch, and I think that that's a line that we have to obviously try not to cross and get into zoning trouble or whatever. But you realize that when you're working in this way, it really becomes a place that you exist for a good portion of your life. So it needs to be supportive of more than just you and your laptop, but really your whole life.
I know that General Assembly's focus is going towards education and less so with the co-working, and you can probably speak to this as well, but there were certain challenges as well as opportunities that came along with co-working different from an office space. One was, in a typical office, turnover is a negative thing. When someone leaves, they obviously left because they weren't happy or the office wasn't happy, and we were sitting down thinking, what do you do? Because to leave the nest with General Assembly, WeWork is a positive thing. There's growth. You're sending them off. Hopefully you've acted like a launch pad. And so even little things for the first General Assembly, we decided we'd create this big magnetic chart chalkboard wall, because the image I had from my daughter at home was, well, you have those magnetic alphabet letters and you move them around and every day you spell something else. Well, what if all the companies were equally the same, where everyone, had the magnetic letters and there's no negativity to the fact that they get reshuffled? It's kind of embracing and celebrating that. At the same token, there are some challenges because you aren't the same company, so therefore the intellectual property and the brain trust isn't moving one entity in the single direction. So we had to be conscious of, there was people's heart and soul living on their laptops and being spoken about around them, and so therefore you're not going to feel very creative or open and exchanging if you feel that somehow your ideas cannot remain yours until you're ready to share them. So going back to the notion of the spectrum of experiences, an open space, when people talk about open space plans, this is not a big factory. It's not it's not just open. It's not about being physically in one room. It's about, it's more open in its philosophy and its mentality. And so therefore, the physical space, just like all of the best public spaces in the world, are incredibly programmed, almost overly programmed, overlapping. It's a Venn diagram of uses such that, it does maintain that energy, maintain that vibe and that critical mass.